The midwife's hands trembled as she pulled the bloodied sheets away, her eyes avoiding Sarah's desperate gaze. 7 times now, 7 tiny souls that had slipped through her fingers like water, leaving behind only the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. The silence in the cabin stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest, broken only by the distant sound of her husband's boots retreating down the wooden steps. He wouldn't look at her anymore. Hadn't touched her in months. The other women in town whispered behind their hands when she passed, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something darker, the superstitious fear that barrenness might be contagious. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling that pull in your chest, that recognition of pain that cuts deeper than words, then you understand why stories like Sarah's matter. Hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know you're there with me in this moment. And smash that hype button, because this story is about to take you somewhere you've never been before. You won't want to miss what happens next. The autumn of 1847 painted the Colorado Territory in shades of amber and rust, but Sarah McKenna saw only gray. At 28, she had buried more dreams than most women twice her age. Her husband Thomas had stopped coming home for supper, preferring the company of his whiskey and the other men at Morrison's trading post. The small cabin they'd built together now felt like a mausoleum, each room echoing with the ghost cries of children who would never run through its halls. She spent her days tending to a garden that seemed to mock her with its fertility, vegetables growing fat and abundant, while her own body remained a barren wasteland. The Apache camp sat 3 miles east of town, a collection of hide lodges that the white settlers viewed with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. The war parties had ceased their raids 2 seasons ago, but the tension remained thick as morning fog. Sarah had seen them occasionally at the trading post, tall, weathered men with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of ancient sorrows. The women stayed hidden, as was their way, but sometimes she caught glimpses of dark hair and colorful blankets moving between the lodges like spirits. It was on a Tuesday morning, when the first frost had begun to silver the grass, that Sarah encountered him. She had been gathering late herbs near Willow Creek, her wicker basket only half full, when she heard the sound of labored breathing. Following the noise, she discovered a man slumped against a cottonwood tree, his bronze skin pale with fever, a crude bandage wrapped around his thigh, dark with dried blood. He was Apache. She could tell from the cut of his buckskin shirt and the silver ornaments that caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like a door that had been locked for years, suddenly creaking open. He didn't speak, but his gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was pain there, yes, but also a recognition that seemed to reach across the chasm of their different worlds. Without thinking, she knelt beside him, her hands already moving to examine the wound. He tensed but didn't pull away, watching her face as she carefully peeled back the makeshift bandage. The cut was deep but clean, probably from a knife rather than a bullet. It needed proper cleaning and fresh dressing. Sarah found herself speaking in soft, measured tones, the same voice she had once imagined using to comfort the children she would never have. "This needs tending," she said, though she wasn't sure he understood English. "I can help if you'll let me." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if reading a map written in a language only he could decipher. Then, slowly, he nodded. Sarah helped him to his feet, surprised by how naturally her shoulder fit under his arm, how right it felt to support his weight as they made their way back toward her cabin. She should have been afraid. Thomas would be furious if he knew. But fear seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. Inside the cabin, she settled him on the wooden chair beside the fireplace, the same chair where Thomas used to read his newspaper before the losses had driven him to seek solace elsewhere. The Apache man, She still didn't know his name, watched her move around the small space with the quiet attention of someone accustomed to reading survival in the smallest details. Sarah heated water over the fire, gathered clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey Thomas had left behind. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from all the time she had tended to wounds both visible and hidden. As she cleaned the cut, he spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, roughened by pain, but carrying an unexpected gentleness. "You have lost much," he said in accented but clear English. It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands stilled for a moment, the cloth dripping pink water onto the floor. She looked up to find him watching her with those penetrating eyes, and somehow she knew he wasn't talking about material possessions. 7, she whispered, the word falling from her lips like a confession. 7 babies. They say I'm cursed. She expected him to pull away, to make the sign against evil that some of the more superstitious townspeople used when they thought she wasn't looking. Instead, he reached out with his free hand and touched her wrist, his fingers warm against her skin. "My wife," he said quietly. "She died bringing our son into the world. The baby lived 3 days. His thumb traced a small circle on her wrist, a gesture so intimate and unexpected that Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The medicine man said her spirit was too eager to join the ancestors, that she could not stay in a world that held too much sorrow. Sarah finished bandaging his leg in silence, but something had changed in the air between them. When she was done, he stood slowly, testing his weight on the injured limb. "I am called Ayana," he said. "It means eternal blossom in my language. My mother gave me this name because I was born in winter, when nothing else would grow." "Sarah," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "It means princess in Hebrew, though I've never felt much like royalty." Ayana smiled then, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from anyone in months. "Names are wishes our parents make for us," he said. "Sometimes it takes many seasons for the wish to come true." He left then, disappearing into the forest as quietly as he had appeared, but not before pressing something into her palm. A small carved figure of a woman with her arms outstretched, made from smooth river stone. Sarah held it long after he was gone, feeling its weight and warmth, wondering if this was what hope felt like after so long without it. Thomas came home that evening reeking of whiskey and another woman's perfume. He barely glanced at Sarah as he stumbled toward their bedroom, muttering something about staying late at the trading post. Sarah said nothing, but her fingers found the small stone carving in her apron pocket, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Mrs. Henderson from the general store arrived breathless and wide-eyed, her bonnet askew from her hurried ride. "Sarah, dear," she gasped, clutching at the doorframe, "there's been an incident. Thomas and some of the other men, they went to the Apache camp last night. Said they were going to settle things once and for all." Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "What happened?" "There was a fight. Shots were fired. Thomas," Mrs. Henderson's voice broke. "Thomas is dead, Sarah. So are 2 of the Apache men. The territorial governor is sending soldiers. They're saying it's going to be war." The world tilted sideways, and Sarah gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Not grief. She had mourned her marriage long before Thomas drew his last breath. But terror. If there was going to be war, Ayana was in danger. All of them were in danger. She thought of his gentle hands, the way he had spoken of loss without bitterness, and something fierce and protective rose up in her chest. "I have to go," she said, pushing past Mrs. Henderson. "Go! Sarah, where could you possibly—" But Sarah was already running, her skirts tangling around her legs as she raced toward the forest. She had to warn him, had to find him before the soldiers arrived. The carved stone figure bounced in her pocket with each step, a small weight that seemed to pull her forward like a compass needle, seeking true north. She found the Apache camp in chaos. Lodges were being struck with military precision, horses loaded with belongings, children gathered close to their mothers. The air hummed with urgent voices, speaking in a language she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. They were leaving, and quickly. Ayana emerged from one of the larger lodges, his face grim with purpose. When he saw Sarah standing at the edge of the camp, his expression shifted to something between surprise and concern. He limped toward her, favoring the leg she had bandaged just the day before. "You should not be here," he said, but his voice held no anger. "It is not safe." "Neither is staying," Sarah replied, breathing hard from her run. "Thomas is dead. There are soldiers coming. I had to warn you." "We know," Ayana said simply. "We have been preparing since before dawn. My people, we are used to leaving." He paused, studying her face. "But why did you come? Your husband is dead." "You are free to start again. Find another man who will give you the children you want." Sarah laughed, a sound sharp with irony. "Free. I'm a barren widow in a town that already whispers about me being cursed. No man will have me now. I'll end up like old Mrs. Garrett, living alone until I die, and they find my body weeks later." Something shifted in Ayana's expression, a decision forming behind his dark eyes. Around them, the camp continued its organized dissolution, but he seemed to have stepped outside of time. "Come with us," he said quietly. "What?" "Come with us," he repeated, reaching out to take her hands in his. "My people are traveling north, to the lands beyond the big mountains. There is a place there where we can live in peace, where the soldiers will not follow." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. You barely know me." "Ooh, I know enough," Ayana said, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I know you have a healer's touch. I know you understand loss without letting it turn you bitter. I know you risked your safety to warn people who are strangers to you." He paused, his gaze intense. "And I know that when I look at you, I see something I thought I had lost forever." "What's that?" "Tomorrow," he said simply. The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah like a physical thing. Everything she had ever known was here, her cabin, her garden, the graves of her lost children. But what was left for her, really? A town that saw her as cursed, a life of slow decay and whispered pity. She thought of the 7 tiny souls she had carried and lost, and suddenly she understood something that had eluded her for years. Maybe she hadn't been meant to be a mother in the traditional sense. Maybe her purpose was something else entirely. "I don't speak your language," she said. "I don't know your customs. I would be a burden." Ayana smiled, that same gentle expression that had caught her off guard the day before. "Language can be learned. Customs can be taught. But a good heart, that cannot be created where it does not already exist." A shout from across the camp interrupted them. One of the Apache men was pointing toward the eastern horizon, where a dust cloud was rising. The soldiers were coming, and they were coming fast. "Choose now," Ayana said, his grip on her hands tightening. "Stay and face whatever comes, or trust me to keep you safe." Sarah looked back toward the town, toward the life that had brought her nothing but sorrow. Then at the man before her, whose eyes held promises she was afraid to believe. In her pocket, the small stone carving seemed to pulse with warmth. "I choose tomorrow," she said. What happened next moved with the fluid efficiency of a dance rehearsed 1,000 times. Ayana lifted Sarah onto his horse, swinging up behind her despite his injured leg. The camp dissolved around them like morning mist, families and belongings flowing toward the mountain passes with the practiced ease of people who had learned that survival meant never becoming too attached to any one place. As they rode, Sarah felt the last threads connecting her to her old life snap one by one. The cabin where she had lost so much grew smaller behind them until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the forest that had hidden so many secrets. The wind whipped her hair free from its careful pins, and for the first time in years, she didn't try to tame it back into submission. "Tell me about this place we're going," she said, her voice barely audible over the thunder of hooves. Ayana's arms tightened around her waist, steadying her against the horse's rhythm. "There is a valley," he said, his breath warm against her ear, "hidden between two peaks that touch the sky. The water runs clear and cold, and the soil is rich enough to grow anything. My grandmother's people lived there before the white men came to these lands. It is a place where children can run free without fear." Children. The word should have brought the familiar stab of pain, but instead Sarah felt something else, a tentative flutter of possibility. "Your people would accept me. My people understand that sometimes the spirits send us exactly what we need, even when it comes in a form we do not expect." Ayana paused, and Sarah could feel him choosing his words carefully. "There are others like you among us, women who came from different tribes, different worlds. Love does not recognize boundaries drawn by men." They rode through the day and into the night, stopping only to rest the horses and share water from Ayana's leather pouch. The other families stayed close, but gave them space, understanding without words that something significant was unfolding. Sarah found herself studying the faces around the small fires, weathered men with gentle eyes, women who moved with quiet strength, children who played games she didn't recognize but whose laughter needed no translation. On the second day, as they climbed higher into the mountains, Sarah began to understand the rhythm of this new life. Everything had its place and purpose, from the way the scouts ranged ahead to check for danger to how the grandmothers kept the children entertained with stories during the long hours of travel. She was given small tasks, helping to gather firewood, assisting with the preparation of meals, and found herself falling into the pattern with surprising ease. It was on the third night that Ayana told her about his wife. They sat apart from the others, sharing a simple meal of dried meat and wild berries, the stars spread above them like scattered diamonds. "Her name was Itzel," he said, staring into the small fire between them. "She was the daughter of a war chief, beautiful and fierce. Everyone expected us to have many children, to carry on both our bloodlines." His voice grew quiet. "When she died, I thought the spirits were punishing me for some unknown transgression. I became angry, bitter. I stopped participating in the ceremonies, stopped believing in anything beyond the next sunrise." Sarah reached across the space between them and touched his hand. "What changed?" "You," he said simply, turning his palm up to capture her fingers. "When I saw you kneeling beside me in the forest, tending to a stranger's wounds without thought for your own safety, I remembered what my grandmother used to say. She told me that the spirits never take something away without offering something else in return. Sometimes we just have to be patient enough to recognize the gift." "And you think I'm a gift?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ayana lifted their joined hands and pressed her knuckles to his lips. "I think we are gifts to each other," he said. "Two people who have learned that love is not always about creating new life. Sometimes it is about healing the life that already exists." The valley, when they finally reached it, was everything Ayana had promised and more. Hidden between towering peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky, it spread before them like a green jewel set in a crown of stone. A river wound through its center, fed by waterfalls that cascaded down the mountain faces in ribbons of silver. The air was thin and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. But it was not empty. As their group descended into the valley, Sarah could see other camps scattered along the riverbank, more Apache families who had made this journey before them, creating a community in this hidden sanctuary. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played in the shallows of the river, and everywhere there was the sense of people who had found a place where they could finally stop running. The integration into this new life happened gradually, like the slow warming of earth after a long winter. Sarah learned to prepare traditional foods, to weave baskets from river grass, to read the subtle signs that predicted changes in weather. The language came harder, but Ayana was patient, teaching her words and phrases during their long walks along the river. More importantly, she learned about the Apache understanding of family. It was not limited to blood relations or even to marriage bonds. Family was created through choice, through the decision to care for one another, to share burdens and joys alike. Sarah found herself adopted by the grandmother women, who taught her the healing arts that went far beyond what she had learned from the white doctor in town. She discovered that her inability to bear children was not seen as a curse here, but simply as one path among many that a woman's life might take. "The spirits give each person different gifts," explained Nalnish, an elderly woman who had become Sarah's closest teacher. "Some are meant to bring new souls into the world. Others are meant to heal the souls that are already here. Both are necessary. Both are sacred." As autumn deepened into winter, Sarah and Ayana's relationship deepened as well. There was no formal ceremony, no exchange of rings or vows spoken before a preacher. Instead, there was a gradual intertwining of lives, a slow recognition that they had become essential to each other's daily existence. Sarah moved her few belongings into Ayana's lodge, and they began the quiet work of building a life together. The first real test came with the arrival of winter's deepest cold. Food became scarce, and several of the children fell ill with a fever that the traditional remedies seemed unable to touch. Sarah found herself working alongside the medicine men, combining her knowledge of white man's healing with their ancient wisdom. For 3 days and nights she barely slept, moving from lodge to lodge, tending to the sick with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. It was during this crisis that she truly understood what Ayana had meant about being gifts to each other. As she knelt beside a small boy whose fever had broken just before dawn, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Ayana stood behind her, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "You saved him," he said quietly. Sarah looked down at the sleeping child, his breathing finally deep and regular. "We saved him," she corrected, "all of us together." "No," Ayana said, helping her to her feet. "This is what you were meant to do. This is why the spirits brought you to us." But as spring returned to the valley, bringing with it new growth and renewed hope, Sarah began to understand the truth of his words. She had spent so many years defining herself by what she could not do, could not carry a child to term, could not keep a husband's love, could not find her place in the world she had been born into. But here, in this hidden valley among people who had also learned to remake themselves, she discovered what she could do. She could heal. She could teach. She could love without conditions or expectations. She could be a mother to children who were not born from her body, but who needed her care nonetheless. She could be a wife to a man who valued her for who she was, not for what she might produce. The carved stone figure that Ayana had given her that first day found a place of honor in their lodge, sitting on a small shelf beside the entrance. Sometimes, in the evening light, Sarah would catch sight of it and remember the woman she had been, broken, bitter, convinced that her life held no purpose. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she had known briefly, but never really understood. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Ayana took her hand in his familiar gesture. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving everything behind?" Sarah considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked something important. She thought about her cabin, probably empty now or occupied by some other family. She thought about the graves she had left behind, the small markers that had once seemed like the only proof that her losses had mattered. She thought about the woman she might have become if she had stayed. Bitter, alone, slowly fading into irrelevance. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it, but sometimes I wonder about the woman I was before, whether she would recognize the woman I am now." Ayana smiled, lifting their joined hands to press against his heart. "She would be proud," he said. "She would see that all her suffering led to something beautiful." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion settle over her like a warm blanket. She had lost 7 children, but she had gained something else, a different kind of family, a different kind of purpose. She had been rejected by one world, but she had been embraced by another. The carved stone figure in their lodge seemed to glow in the firelight, its outstretched arms no longer a symbol of emptiness, but of welcome. Sarah had learned that sometimes the greatest gift is not getting what you think you want, but discovering what you actually need. She had wanted children of her own blood, but she had needed to learn that love is not limited by biology, that family is created by choice, that healing others can heal yourself. In the end, she had not lost 7 babies. She had gained 1,000 children, a community, a purpose that filled the hollow spaces in her soul with something stronger than grief. She had learned that sometimes the spirits know better than we do what will make us whole. And in this hidden valley, surrounded by people who understood that love comes in many forms, Sarah McKenna, now Sarah Ayana, finally found the life she was meant to live. Not the life she had planned, but the life that had been waiting for her all along, patient as stone, enduring as the mountains that sheltered their secret world. If you've stayed with Sarah through this entire journey, if you felt her pain and celebrated her healing, then you understand something profound about the human capacity for transformation. Maybe you're facing your own valley of loss right now, wondering if there's anything beyond the grief. Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest wounds become the doorways to our greatest gifts. Sometimes what we think is an ending is actually a beginning we never could have imagined. The love we're meant to find isn't always the love we're looking for, but it's always exactly what we need.